to the SJ Child Show. This episode is sponsored by Water and Body Basics. Visit 3440 South, 5600 West, West Valley City, Utah. Mention SJ Childs today.
Hi, and welcome to the SJ Childs Show. I'm your host, SJ Childs, and today my special guest is Eric Garcia. He is the author of We're Not Broken, which is a book that celebrates autism, and you all know that I am a fan of all things autism. I hope I said the name right. Of course, I've been, reading it and looking at it, and then things all fly out the side of my head when I'm speaking sometimes. So thank you, Eric, so much for being here today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about yourself and what got you started on your journey here.
My name is Eric Garcia. I am the senior Washington correspondent for The Independent. I've written for I've worked at the Washington Post, The Hill, Roll Call, Market Watch, National Journal.
Wow.
I've written for places like the New Republic, Salon, the American Prospect, Time Magazine, the Daily Beast. And the way that I got started on learning about autism is I was born, I'm autistic. But more importantly, I began writing about autism because I'm a political journalist. And what happened is I felt that a lot of the discussions we have about politics, a lot of discussions we have about autism in politics usually begin or ended with either talking about curing autism or about the pernicious, and can I curse on here?
Well, we'll say yes for today.
Okay, I'll try.
Yeah.
Began and ended with either talking about a cure or the pernicious and frankly false myth about vaccines and autism.
Yeah.
We can get this later, but I was going to say bullshit. But so what happened is, because we have, and also on top of that, the thing to take into account is that we've gotten autism wrong for so long in one way or the other, whether it was in our first studies about autism saying that it was caused by unloving mothers, to the idea that it was an epidemic, like in the 1990s when we had the discussion, to the discussion about vaccines. So as a political journalist, the alarm bells went off to me, and I was thinking to myself, well, that must mean that we probably, if we have bad ideas about autism, then we might have really bad policy. So what happened is, in 2015, I was at a party with a friend, and he offered me a drink, and I said, I can't drink because I'm on the autism spectrum and a medicine I take doesn't mix well. And then instead of him saying, oh, come on, have a shot with me, he said, oh, there's a lot of autistic people in DC. You should write about that. And I thought, I'm 24. I was an economics reporter at National Journal, and I was happy to do that for, the rest of my life, And then what happened is I was at National Journal, and the print magazine shut down. And then my editor, Richard Just, said, hey, pitch me any ideas, for the print magazine. And I pitched this idea. And then he said to me, why does this piece need to exist? Because I initially was going to have kind of this kind of chatty, fun talk of the town, kind of like the secret lives of autistic people in DC. Maybe one day I'll write that. Like, who knows? Because that sounds like a really fun piece,
Yeah,
but
certainly.
But then he said, Richard, God bless me, he kind of asked me, why does this piece need to exist? And I said, well, I think we focus too much on trying to cure autism and not enough on trying to help autistic people live fulfilling lives.
Yeah.
It's like, there's your piece, go. And around this time, if you remember, this is in 2015, if you remember, there was that measles outbreak because of parents who wouldn't vaccinate their kids. And, I grew up in Southern California, not too far from Disneyland. And I know those parents, they're a bunch of liberal hippies, and at the same time Donald Trump was starting to run for president. And, and that was something that my day job, I was thinking about a lot, though, not that much, because I didn't think he'd be the nominee. I still thought Marco Rubio. Seriously, I thought Marco Rubio was going to be president. Yeah. So or be the nominee. So like that shows you how little even people like me who do this for a living do this. But if you remember, he said that autism is becoming an epidemic. He talked about the vaccines. He talked about spacing them out. He talked about his friend whose kid became autistic after getting the vaccine and things like that. And this was just not true.
Mania.
So, on one end, you have a bunch of liberal hippies in California who don't want to vaccinate their kids. And on the other end, say what you will about Donald Trump, you know, he may be an unorthodox Republican, but he's still a Republican, you know? And that made me think, wow, I'm hardly a both sideser. I tend to think that you should call a spade and criticize one side when the wrong. But, you know, this is going on both kind of ideological ends of the political spectrum.
Yeah.
So that led me to believe we just really don't do a good job talking about autism. And that's really what set me on my course.
Yeah. And isn't that the truth? And, you know, my husband and I today, he has Asperger's, and we talk a lot about kind of the war between generations right now.
Yeah.
The war between the 20, 30 something, you know, autistic adults and the parents, for example.
Wow.
So yeah, tell me what you think about that. What are your ideas about that?
So I think that it's important to recognize, I kind of, in my book, I talk about this. You talk about the 20 to 30-year-olds. I kind of call that the spectrum generation.
Yeah, right?
Because it's important to remember that for a long time, and I'm going to pull up my book, is that that autism didn't exist didn't have a formal. It was first discussed in 1911 by a Swiss psychiatrist known as Eugen Bleuler.
Yeah.
So this is 110 years ago, and he called it. He's considered it a symptom of childhood schizophrenia. It didn't appear in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, or the DSM, until 1952 in the section Schizophrenic Reactions Occurring Before Puberty. Mm. It appeared again in 1968 as a symptom of prepuberty schizophrenia. It doesn't get its own diagnosis until 1980.
Wow.
From schizophrenia. So take into account, that separate diagnosis has only existed for 41 years. There are autistic people older than that diagnosis.
Absolutely.
So, and it's also important to remember that it wasn't until, and then later on, you saw the introduction of things like PDD-NOS and Asperger's syndrome. And then, of course, at the same time, what you saw was in 1990, there was a real important public policy that was passed. In 1990, the year I was born, the United States implemented the Americans with Disabilities Act, which was instrumental, and it was passed with a Democratic Senate and a Republican Congress, a Democratic House. And then also, but I would argue there's an even more important piece of legislation in that, and that is it was the reauthorization of what was then the Education for Handicapped Children Act, called the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA. Anybody who has ever had an IEP knows about IDEA? Yes. Or Individualized Education Plan. I know
exactly.
Your listeners probably know it, but just for lay people, I'm just saying.
Exactly.
You know, but the reason why it's important is because what happened is that this was happening while the diagnostic criteria was changing. And it's important, it matters because it specifically included autism. And the House of Representatives report on the legislation said that, quote, autism has suffered from an historically inaccurate identification with mental illness, and that including autism in IDEA was, quote, meant to establish autism definitively as a developmental disability and not as a form of mental illness. Now, why is that important? What it means is that now autistic people are considered disabled, and therefore they are entitled to a, quote, free, appropriate public education. Again, a term a lot of parents and everybody would be familiar with. So what happened is that that meant that schools now had to report which autistic kids they were serving to the federal government. So what that did is that while it was far from the windfall that autistic people wanted, you know, it was still a taste of
opened up services and support for the kids that needed it. Yeah.
Because again, I want to reiterate, it wasn't the windfall. The federal government was supposed to fund around 40% of it. And it only is ever funded around 14.6 or 15%, depending on what you so that puts more onus on the states, and that gives the states fewer resources. In fact, one of the funny things about it is during the 2020 presidential campaign, which was historic for a lot of reasons, and we could talk about that, the 2020 presidential campaign, but almost every major Democratic presidential candidate pledged to fully fund IDEA. But like, think about how low a bar that is, that like, a campaign pledge is to, I'm going to fully fund this thing that the federal government promised it was going to.
Yeah.
You know, so some people like Bernie Sanders went further than that, saying, okay, we're not only going to fully fund IDEA, we're going to increase the funding for IDEA. But that was important. So what happened is that because up until then, it was the parents who were the main advocates.
Yeah.
You had people like Ruth Christ Sullivan. You had people like Bernard Rimland. And these parents, I don't want to diminish the importance of what they did, because they were really important in kind of relegating the idea of refrigerator parents to the trash heap.
Yeah, the pioneers of that. Yeah.
So I don't want to discredit them, though some people like Bernard Rimland, they eventually bought into like really crank ideas about B12 or vitamins or changing and Bernard Rimland testified at that congressional hearing with Andrew Wakefield, you know. So I don't, so like, it's really, but that's kind of indicative of the larger problem, isn't it? Is that you could even have people with really good intentions who, if you're not consulting autistic people, they can go off the rails, and by trying to change autistic people and subscribe and prescribe really terrible and really harmful ideas. So there's this kind of divide. And I think that what's happened is that those kids who first grew up with IDEA, like myself, are now growing up. Yeah. And are now able to, even though we only had a smidge of what we were supposed to do, that smidge was just like, it was my mom, I grew up in a very, very religious household, and I'm religious myself. You know, it's the faith of the mustard seed. It's this idea, like literally it was a mustard seed size of the amount of services we were supposed to get. It wasn't supposed to be we didn't even get the full thing, but it led to so many people recognizing and getting some services and then realizing we deserve more.
Yeah.
So, and then also them saying now, we deserve to be at the center of any conversation.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
Really with the divide, you know, you talk about your husband. If you don't mind, how old is your husband?
42. Yeah, he's 3.
Around that kind of era.
Exactly. Oh, I mean, it was horrific for him. He, you know, and I want to talk about something else too, is that your thoughts of the relation between ADHD and autism as well, because I fully feel like they are.
No, they are, yeah, absolutely.
But he had an official ADHD and diagnosis when he was young, and I had the opportunity to read his neurological reports, which gave me great insight, because I was going through my son's, 5th ADOS test, and it was like, and then I was like, oh, wait a second, husband, check. And so I brought it to him and I was like, sit down, dear, let's talk, your nurse wife is here to talk to you, I'm not a doctor, but I just decided, this really matches up. And then we were obviously getting our son, trying to go all the paths that they give you, right? We were taking
of course.
Give you, changing his diet might help. Oh, this, therapy might help, this and that. Yeah. And as a parent, like, this was my first biological child. I have raised a child that was a bonus child for my husband, but this was my first biological child. And so it's a lot of pressure. So,
of course.
Right. And I started I was very into early education. And so when he was in the womb still, I was, doing classical music. I was, as soon as he was born, showing him the Your Baby Could Read program, because obviously I had no other identifications of anything. And
Yeah.
it really, like, for him, opened up this whole new way of being able to communicate with me, which then come to find out, at 16 months, he's nonverbal.
Yeah.
But now he knows how to read, and now he can communicate a little bit easier with us. And that was so super. I was so, proud of us for taking those steps, even though it seemed unorthodox to other people.
Right.
That's okay. I don't care.
My mom taught me how to read when I was like 3. So,
it's really indicative of what the parents do, right?
Yeah,
it's
how
they
parents do. And I think that what's interesting is that, like, your son is like, what, 20 years younger than I am, which makes me feel old. I'm 30. But like, I think about it a lot. And like, I think about the kind of double-edged sword, because like, on one end, like, I think, wow, what if my mom did have the access to that kind of lexicon and my family had the access? On the other end, like, maybe my mom could have found some really terrible snake oil salesman. This
Seriously.
was around at the peak of like the autism vaccine panic. And like, so it's so like, on one end, I'm glad that we didn't have like the internet and things like that.
Yeah.
And on the other end, I'm kind of like, oh, what if we had that kind of world of resources? And there were sites like The Thinking Person's Guide to Autism, and there were books like Uniquely Human or Neurotribe.
I love that one. Yes. I'm trying to get Barry on the show. If you're friends with him and talk to him, come tell him to come
I would
see
love
me.
to talk. I would love to talk to him. I'm like, you me both, buddy.
We'll gang up on him.
But that's the point, is that like, you are a product. We're a product. We're as much a product of our surroundings as as much as we influence them.
Yeah.
And I think that like it's fascinating, because I'm actually one of those people who doesn't believe that parents and autistic people need to be at war with each other.
I agree. I'm right there too. I'm like the parent and the person that has all of the people with autism. And I've never been diagnosed, but I can give you about a 2-page list of all the ways I could be,
Yeah, no, the fruit doesn't fall far from the tree. Let's just
exactly.
like it exists somewhere. But like, the thing that I've the point that I make is that like, parents, is that the difference is, I think a lot of parents, I think the most vocal parents often make themselves the subject.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I made the mistake of looking when I was on, of a story where I was interviewed earlier this week, of reading the comments from parents and then making it all about them and saying, well, it's easy for you to say because you're not like my kid. And it's like, I'm a lot more like your kid than you realize. A, and B, I want all the things that I argue for, full rights, full dignity of human beings. I want all that for your kid too. In fact, I want more of it. I want the federal government to spend more of it. I want let's talk about, your listeners might not like me getting political, but like political, autism is political. I will say that from the top of my lungs. President Joe Biden has proposed spending $400 billion in long-term care for adults and elderly, for children, people with disabilities and elderly adults. And then Congress is talking about spending only half of that, not the House of Representatives, but like that would eliminate the wait list. Because like, I've heard of parents, and your listeners probably knows, of like putting your kids on when they're on the wait list when they're like 8.
10 years. Yeah.
So that when they're 10. But like, I want so that we can clear up that queue. Like, I don't need home and community-based services, thank God, but like, I want those home and community-based services, and I want us to spend, I'm going to sound like Donald Trump, want us to spend a big, tremendous amount on home and community-based services. And I want there to be funding for Medicaid, and I want there to be, I want us to spend as much for disabled people and education as the federal government spends on the military.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, we're all humans and we all deserve the same space and, the same worth and all of that. So I completely agree with that. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, so like, a lot of people, when they say that, oh, you're not like my kid, hey, like I said, I'm a lot more like your kid. There are times where I still have meltdowns or breakdowns. I may be able to speak, but, you mentioned your son was nonverbal and or non-speaking for a while, but like I'm sure you would have loved him and this is the thing I would say, you would have loved him whether he could never speak a day in his life or
100%.
Or he did speak, and you would find different ways to say for him to you'd learn to understand the ways that he says he loves you
exactly
as much as actually saying those 3 words. I love you.
I read a poem about that exact thing. Exactly.
So yeah, like, I mean, I don't think that there needs to be a war. In fact, I think, and one of the things I write about in the book, a lot of parents are, when I talk about this woman, Lydia Wayman in Pennsylvania, her mom is one of the best advocates for her when she gets treatment at the hospital, because she knows that neurotypicals are taken more seriously. So like they can and they should be good allies, just like how white people need to be good allies against racism, and
100%.
straight dudes like myself need to be serious when speaking up for our LGBTQ plus colleagues and friends. In the same way, our neurotypical loved ones need to recognize that they have a tremendous amount of cachet that can be used. So so I think that's
the truth. So. I love that. No, and I love that you're so passionate about bringing these types of ideas up, because there's not enough of it. Like you said, there's just, some names that you can put out there and say, and, Temple, granted, everybody knows about Temple and everything, but that's only one view of what autism is like.
Right.
And that was from that generation also, it was a long, ways away from us.
Like it's funny because like my dad asked me like a few months ago, like right before my book was coming in, he's like, "Hey, Eric, have you heard of Temple Grandin?" I'm like, "Dad, I of course I know who Temple and like this is my father. I'm not putting my dad on the spot, but it's like that's indicative. Yeah. That's my father."
Yeah.
And he's asking if I know who Temple Grandin is because there's such a limited there's just a limited scope of who autistic people of what autism looks like. And I have nothing against, I have no beef with Temple, like
yeah, of course.
But like but that's only one permutation that ignores non-scientists, that ignores Black autistic people and people of color and plenty of other autistic people who don't speak or who don't or not work in science or technology or who are artists or something like that, or just regular everyday normal people. Like one of the things that I say a lot of times is the most difficult thing about being autistic is this expectation that you have to be extraordinary. And that is in order for us to care about you. Yeah. Whereas like, I think that we deserve autistic people, like a perfect sign of privilege is when you're allowed to be normal and mediocre.
Absolutely.
Which is, we talk a lot about mediocre white males, but like, I would love for there to be a mediocre autistic person and allow them to live their lives. I don't consider myself that special. I just kind of want to be normal, and I kind of want every other autistic people to be able to be normal.
Yeah,
there's no, like, have you ever seen the show Bob's Burgers?
Yeah.
It's in the pilot where they throw the toothpicks down and then they say to Tina, "You're the worst autistic person out there." Like, but like, I kind of want to be able to, so like, I don't have to be able to count the toothpicks or it's really weird how we have these kind of, we have these unrealistic expectations of autistic people, or we give them the soft bigotry of low expectations.
Yes. There isn't like this normal human ground that are just like, we're all human, we're all the same.
It's impossible for autistic people to exist in between those two poles, even though most neurotypical people exist in exist within those poles all the time.
Yeah. Definitely. No, in our personal experience in our family, we've really learned how to just kind of give away society's expectations or ideas of dinner time, bedtime, certain times for things to happen. And we've evolved a system that works with the biology of everyone that is in our family. Whatever works for you on your own biology, on your own time, we can accommodate that. We're at home, we do homeschool, we do so we have a lot of free time and a lot of flexibility to do those kinds of things and make those kind of accommodations for our entire family.
Yeah, totally. And I respect that. I think the other thing is that we put way too high expectations, or too low expectations. And instead of asking the question, what do you need? What do autistic people need? We almost prescribe them these rules without ever really consulting with them.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely a big fan of, advocating, let someone self-advocating, sticking up for the people who, show you that they need help, and families that come to me that, are just like, I don't understand how to find these resources. And for me, it's just like, click, 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 click. Here you go. Here's a list, and it comes so easy.
I think that goes to a larger thing, which is that, and we talked about this, or we touched on it earlier, but there is the fact of the matter is that it's really easy to get suckered in by anything. Cause almost immediately, as soon as you get the diagnosis, they recommend, because it's the only thing that insurers cover a lot of times, you're recommended ABA. Or you're given the pamphlet for Autism Speaks. And it leads to autistic people getting left behind, or it leads to parents going down a lot of incorrect pathways,
rabbit holes, basically.
Yes. That's not really that productive.
Yeah.
So I think that it leads to. So I think one of the mistakes is that, like you said, one of the good things is that I wish that instead of having autism medicalized, as soon as you get the diagnosis, instead you'd be connected to a larger community.
Yes.
You'd be connected 100%. To people who don't. Even one of the beauties of the internet, just like the internet can be a complete trash heap.
Yeah.
Flip side is that you can meet a lot of autistic people and a lot of autistic adults, and a lot of parents who already figure this out and have gone through the trial and error. A perfect example of that is Shannon Desroches Rosa, who I'm friendly with and who I consider a friend. She went through the kind of listen to the snake oil salesman, and then finally she accepted it. So hopefully, to borrow from Jay-Z, Hove did it so you don't have to, in the same way. Shannon and all them did it so you don't have to. And hopefully, but the problem is, I think that there's still that disconnect. And I wish that there would be a better way to connect. Whatever, because usually, now almost once or twice a week on Twitter, some people will say, what are some books that I can learn about autism? And to your point, then people immediately tag me, and I'm like, don't get me wrong. I'm glad, that you're going to pay my rent. Thank you. In the same time, I also have a list of books, full that are far more comprehensive. Steve Silverman's book, Neurotribes, obviously top of the list. Barry's book, Considering the Autistic Child, is a relatively new one that I've started recommending to people. The Thinking Person's Guide to Autism. There's another one that I have. Autistic Community and the Neurodiversity Movement. There's a list of things, and there's a list of there's a list, and there's a litany of things, and then there's even videos I recommend. I recommend Mel Baggs's In My Language, God rest their soul, Mel Baggs. I recommend podcasts, or I recommend websites like Thinking Person's Guide. So there are resources, but the problem is that because the doctors, and this is ultimately what these things are about, is they're about power. And as of right now, and again, like, I hate to turn a feel-good podcast about parenting into something about politics, but politics is about power, and doctors as of right now still have a lot of power because they're the first people who get to say you have autism.
Yeah, definitely.
The kid is autistic.
So
and
true.
when they have that power, they then have the authority to say, okay, because they're the ones who are giving you this diagnosis. Then they're the ones who say, so if the doctor's saying this, then just like any other doctor, you're like, okay, what do we do?
Yeah, here's where you go. Here's your script.
Yeah, here's your prescription. But more often than not, we don't listen. We don't have that kind of census that said we're not, we're immediately, because that's your first opinion, you're more inclined to trust them, and you're less inclined to, look it up yourself. You're less inclined to meet other people in the community. You're like every community in every county in America should have some kind of autism.
Agreed.
Autistic people who can meet with other adult autistic people. One of the things, like a lot of my friends who are gay, they have gay elders. Unfortunately, there aren't that many from the previous generation because of AIDS. But and that's horrible. But like there are now some, there still are enough that they can look toward. There are elder statesmen in every community, and statesmen and stateswomen in every community, but like for whatever reason, because autism has been so medicalized, they are often the second opinion.
Yeah, right.
As opposed to the doctors. And I think that really influences how we look at autism.
Yeah. What about your experience with the workplace and employment? I mean, I know that a lot of people like to talk about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, I think that in some ways, my work narrative, because I mentioned where I worked, all these places.
Yeah.
That's not what it sounds like. Like, if you were to just listen to that, you would think, okay, autism success story, like Temple Grandin or like John L. Robinson, and I don't have anything against it. But like what it does is that it ultimately it makes it kind of this before and after, instead of, when it's rarely linear.
Yeah.
So I think that sorry, that was my family, but like, it's really like, because I think that like, and I read about this in the book, and let me just read straight from my book. So, this is the point in the story where people expect a happy ending. The part where an autistic person goes from being a social outcast to channeling their abilities into gainful employment. It's probably why a few people bought this book. This happy ending is seen in Temple Grandin when she pioneers new methods to handle livestock because she can think in pictures. It is John Elder Robison in his book, Look Me in the Eye, learning to set off bombs and rock and roll band Kiss's guitars, and then working on toys before moving to cars. It's every autistic person in Silicon Valley who can program a computer. These stories are neither bad nor untrue. In fact, they offered a much needed corrective to the idea autistic people could not work or that their autism meant they were defective. But highlighting hyper savants who improve companies' bottom lines implies that only certain autistic people are worthy and deserve to find employment. And it positions autistic people who can't find work without government services as a burden. Finally, it ignores many autistic people who exist somewhere between those two extremes, who have simply not been afforded adequate resources to find and keep a job. And I really believe that, because I think what happens is that it puts my problem with those narratives is that it puts the onus solely on the autistic person. It doesn't put the onus on employers to change.
Yeah, definitely. And that's what needs to happen, is that we need to have a kind of a roundabout way that we treat everyone.
Yeah. So when I had lunch with Adam Kushner, who's my boss at the Washington Post when I worked for them, he asked me, like, when we had lunch, he said, are there any accommodations we could have? I've never had a boss say that before.
Oh, I love that.
And
seeing your value and saying, hey, we love what you're doing. How can we accommodate you
Right,
if that is necessary?
Right. And like Adam, he's great. We no longer work together, but like I will always respect him for that, and that's it. But like that's the bare minimum. The fact that was really important is damning to every other employer.
True.
Like,
it is so true.
It is an indictment of every employer.
Yeah, definitely.
Because what needs to happen is that's something employers should consider on the front end.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we all know that corporate diversity boards are really not that productive, and they often are just meant to make corporations look good.
Yeah.
But like in the same token, like the fact that we don't even consider disability for a lot of them, or we create these autism hiring programs without actually asking autistic people on the front end is baffling to me.
Mm-hmm.
And it shows how little we value autistic people's opinion. And that needs to change, personally, just if you ask me. But like,
I completely value it, by the way, here.
but I hate to say this, you and I are in the minority.
I know.
And that is
we're pioneering to change this language, aren't we?
Our Lord 2021, that shouldn't be a bold statement,
Yeah, definitely.
And I think that I think that it's also easy for people to say that. Also, the flip side of this is like, oh well, he turned out fine, so he doesn't need any accommodations. When like I need accommodations to only do my work. I need to wear headphones when I'm working, especially when I'm on Capitol Hill and like I need to file a story quick on time. I need to have my headphones. Otherwise, I'm not getting anything done because there's just people yelling back and forth. Yeah. Like there needs to be. I need those accommodations.
Yes.
And I worry that people just saying that I'm quote unquote high functioning legitimate needs. I say because they're like, oh well, he found work, he's fine, And in the same way, it says that if autistic people need more support needs, it's like, oh well, it costs too much. And we do it with these quote unquote high functioning autistic people, so we don't need to spend this much money. Let's just focus on the high functioning autistic people. And again, at that point you're just filling out a quota box, and you're not. Yeah. You're not doing anything to actually help people. You're just doing your bottom line, and that's really you're doing the bare minimum. Like, congratulations, buddy.
Yeah, right. No, I completely agree with that. What do you advise for us, just as humans and as Americans, whatever we need to do? What can we do to help make this change happen?
I think the thing that you need to do is that, like, on top of that is, obviously you want to help your kids, give them advice on job interviews and things like that and work etiquette. But more than that, like, I think one of the more important things is like find, one of my problems with these things is that oftentimes it puts the onus on. My problem with like inspirational stories about autistic people finding work is that it puts the onus on the autistic person to find that thing that'll make them, improve a company.
Right.
But like, I think one of the things that you need to do is like, find what instead of finding what's going to be the thing that helps them make a lot of money, find the thing that gives them the most, makes them happiest. And in the same respect, if you're talking with autistic people who might have higher support needs, of course, make sure that they're not going to a sheltered workshop or working at a place that pays them some minimum wage. Because I will say this, and it doesn't matter what their support needs are, they deserve to be paid a minimum wage at least.
Thank you.
A lot of parents think that it's okay and it's justifiable to say, because they say, oh, well, it's about giving them something to do. No.
Yeah. Their human rights still need to be the same.
They still deserve adequate compensation.
They still
definitely paid a full wage and paid a living wage.
Absolutely.
So that's, so also do your homework to make sure that you're not sending your kid to a place where they're going to be segregated. They're going to be integrated, because work is so much. I hear a lot of people talk about the dignity of work, but work is inherently not dignified. Work is only dignified if you get paid a full wage and if you're being treated with dignity by your employers.
So true.
So so also make sure and do your homework. Make sure that this isn't a place where your kid's going to be segregated. A lot of this stuff is it's public data
information.
To know is which places pay below subminimum wage, because you have to get employers have to get a specific 14C waiver. So with public data. Take a look. So again, like, look and make sure that your kid isn't being exploited. Look and make sure that one isn't being exploited, because it's so easy to be exploited.
Yeah, I know. So unfortunate.
So I hate to be Mr. Doom and Gloom, but that's kind of my bag. But again, those are the things. It's about making sure that your kid isn't being used to, just improve a company's bottom line, but anything that makes them happy. Because I imagine, as everybody can tell you, work is more than just about going to a place and like that. It's about, do I feel valued at the company?
Yeah.
All the things that we expect and we want from ourselves as employees, I guarantee you autistic people and other disabled people want from their employer as well.
100%. No, I completely agree with that. Being able to use your creative mind, that helps you grow in all kinds of areas in your life. So that's so important.
Right. And I think that at the same time, I think a lot of these autism hiring initiatives, I don't think that they're often like, okay, great, we got them in, but they don't think, okay, what happens if they want to become a manager? What happens if they want to grow? Like, it's weird.
They're just trying to be PC about it.
It's weird that they don't think about these questions when these are questions, I'm sure that when you were starting to look for work, you were thinking, okay, is this a place I can grow? Is this a place where that's something I think about when I look at work? I think, can I stay at this place long term? Can I, is this a place with good culture? And do I see myself moving up here, or am I going to be stuck in the same thing?
Yeah.
For some reason, we think that we have this idea that, okay, autistic people are super loyal, so they'll be happy working the same spot for a long time. But it's like, no, like they deserve to want to be able to move up, and I've left employers because I felt like there was a ceiling. The same way I'm sure there's a lot of autistic people who do that. So like, my friend John Marble, who's somebody you should have on the podcast, by the way, John Marble.
Please introduce him to us. I love that.
The whole thing is, he was a former Obama administration appointee, and he got diagnosed while he was working in the Obama administration.
Oh, that's cool.
He was he made a point to me that like we talk a lot about autistic people who crash and burn out of these programs, but there's also which is another thing, but there's also the flip side of that, which is a lot of autistic people are growing and leaving these programs because eventually you say, well, just like any other employee, like, wait, I'm working at this place, I don't feel like my work is being valued, so I'm going to go somewhere else.
Yeah, 100%.
And I think if I can add another thing, and I know,
of course,
but like, a lot of these companies that promote autism hiring initiatives, they say like, oh, well, we've found that autistic people are 140% as productive as our neurotypical employees. I get that. I get the impulse. I get that when you're making a business pitch, but I often worry that like, if you say autistic people are going to be 140% more productive, if they're only, 110% more productive, then employers are going to say, well, we feel like we've been ripped off. Can we take this autistic back and get a more predictive autistic?
Oh my goodness, right.
And let's not, and on the flips, and another aspect of that is that like, how do their neurotypical coworkers feel? Because if you're being constantly compared to your autistic coworkers, that's going to breed resentment,
Yeah.
And that the office is more than just where you do your job. There's also a lot of interpersonal politics, and I imagine that could breed resentment on the neurotypicals, and that might not make it a good place for autistic people to work. So
definitely.
Messaging, I get it, because business people have to make a bottom line, but I worry about the unintended consequences of that.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think that's why that kind of messaging makes me deeply uncomfortable.
For sure. I agree. Well, I am so happy. I'm so sorry we have to wrap up our time here today, but I think that we should probably plan to have another conversation.
We should.
This is a wonderful banter back and forth. I just love to have somebody who has so much on their mind to say and is so passionate and educative about the autism life in general. I appreciate you so much for being here.
Thank you very much.
Tell us how we can find you on, do you have a website?
Yes, so you can find me at ericmgarcia.net. You can follow me at Eric M. Garcia on Twitter, where I tweet way too much. You can follow my work at The Independent, at theindependent.co.uk. You can follow me on Instagram at Eric M. Garcia 14, and you can email me or DM me. I usually respond to emails or DMs And then of course, buy my book, We're Not Broken, Changing the Autism Conversation. It is out now by Mariner Books. Buy it, DM me, ask me if you have any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We honor you, and I had such a pleasure talking to you today. So I'm excited to stay in touch, and we'll continue this conversation another time.
Let's keep it up. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric.